My name is Dan Lynch. I teach at Marlboro School, which is a girls' school in Los Angeles. I teach history, world history, AP US history, and I also run the honors research program for humanities and social sciences. So today we'll be looking at a timeline activity that I plan on using in my world history class next semester. So this is 11th grade world history, high school level world history, and the time period we're looking at here is the Cold War and decolonization period. So from the end of World War II through like the 1990s. And this is a complex period because you've got like two major themes going on. You've got the decolonization theme, where you have a lot of these empires crumbling after World War II, the European empires, the Japanese empire, and so on, and all these new nations being born around the world, particularly in Africa and Asia. And then you also have the Cold War ramping up between the Soviet Union and the US. And a lot of these events are kind of tied into both themes. So in all of my units, connections between historical events is a big thing that I stress. And one of the things I test on are Connect 4 paragraphs, where students have to take a cluster of terms. They have an option of like 2 clusters of 5 terms, and they have to pick one of those clusters and write a paragraph talking about how 4 of those terms are linked, both in an overall thematic sense and then in terms of strong connections between the terms, like cause and effect, similarity or difference, or continuity and change. And so for this unit, it's particularly challenging because you've got these 2 themes interacting at the same time. So the connections can be complicated, right? But very important to grapple with. And so typically the way I teach this in class is I have the students take notes in the terms, we discuss connections, and then we do a big messy timeline on the board, on the whiteboard. It gets really complicated and it's hard for students to see all the connections at once. But a 3D timeline like this, we had a chance to talk about this, Emily, Sil and myself, and we kind of thought about like a semicircle timeline as a way to be able to see the whole thing in one view and kind of be immersed in the timeline. So it kind of wraps around. You have all these events that are part of the Cold War and decolonization, and you can kind of inhabit this room. And to help the students remember the terms, if you click on the terms, an object appears that somehow kind of relates to it. So you've got United Nations, you got like a globe spinning around. Iron Curtain is, like you would imagine, is like a curtain, right? And so these are just kind of like nice, easy, cartoony ways to think about the Satyagraha is the Indian nationalist movement led by Gandhi. Cold War is an ice cube. So a way to kind of wrap your head around what the term is. And that's kind of step 1 in the timeline, is to put everything out there and have NATO, have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, have a battleship, and it's still added that animation, which is really cool, firing guns. So yeah, you have the conference, the Bandung Conference, which is like the non-alignment movement. Suez Crisis is a pyramid representing Egypt. These are just ways to help the students remember what these terms are about. You got the Warsaw Pact alliance with a tank. So that's kind of step 1, of kind of putting them all in a timeline and seeing how they are chronologically situated with each other. The real heavy lifting comes when you have to connect the 2 of them. So this would be an activity for students to do in the class. I have them do this on the board. It gets very, very messy, but here they could lay out connections by actually drawing lines between some of these things. You got Checkpoint Charlie there, famous symbol of the Iron Curtain, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So for example, the Checkpoint Charlie thing could be connected to the Iron Curtain. You could draw a line that would go across the timeline. And that would be, the connection would be the Berlin Wall is representing kind of the hardening of the Iron Curtain over time, right? It's part of the Iron Curtain. It's a central part of the Iron Curtain, and it represents how the Iron Curtain becomes more solid over the years, from Winston Churchill first kind of coining the term to it reaching this, very real, tangible wall that separates East and West Berlin and has this checkpoint in between. So you could draw a line between the 2. You could write a text description saying that the Berlin Wall is part of the Iron Curtain. It's the hardening of the Iron Curtain, something that they could replicate in a paragraph when they're writing about it. But they describe the connection. They draw the line. And so students working with groups could be getting in here together, forging these connections, being able to save their work in a way that's hard on a whiteboard in a classroom where you have to wipe the thing clean every day. But everything could be put on this in this timeline, this room that's also a timeline. And the students are forging an understanding of the connections, a robust understanding of how these terms relate to each other, so that when they're giving a random assortment of terms to try to make a paragraph out of them, they have plenty to work with. They know how these things relate to each other, how they're connected. Like, this is the kind of thing as a history teacher I've been doing in my brain for several decades, understanding how these events relate to each other and how they're part of a historical context. But students have a very short time to forge those kinds of connections, right? And this is a way to make it tangible for them, to make it real. They physically are putting the things on a timeline. They're putting the connections between them. It's kind of like the memory technique of the memory palace, where they have like a 3D space where they're imagining this goes here, that goes there. These things are connected in this way. They're actively forging the connections by typing up descriptions of them. And you can do animations for this where you could turn on a couple of terms and the connections between them would light up, and only those, right? So you could simplify what's a very complex web of connections and isolate a few factors. So for like as a review activity, I could have the students either film video or have them in the room, and we could say, how are these 2 or 3 terms connected? Let's light them up and see what the lines are that you've forged between them, and talk about how they're connected to each other. So I think it's a good way to help students forge a robust understanding of connections in history in a way that is very tangible and not just abstract. It helps them forge these kind of neural connections in their memory in a way that it's hard to do just using your own imagination or writing on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. That's basically the idea.